Welcome to Holistic Health for Happy Kids, the podcast where we dive into the root causes of children's health challenges and explore natural solutions to help little ones thrive. I'm Lisa, a passionate pediatric naturopath and mum of 3, dedicated to empowering parents with practical tips and expert insights to raise healthy, happy kids. Each episode will unpack common childhood health concerns like allergies, eczema, fussy eating, and gut health, and share evidence-based advice to support your child's wellness naturally. Let's create a generation of thriving children, one holistic step at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Holistic Health for Happy Kids. And today it's just going to be me you're listening to, but I'm going to be talking about fevers because I feel that fever and fever management is one of the most misunderstood concepts out there when it comes to child's health. And the very kind of ironic thing is that the conventional medical system actually has the same view of fevers as the naturopathic community. It's just that the whole message seems to get lost in translation. And when I say that the conventional medicine system has the same understanding of fevers, I mean like if you actually look into the literature and look what people are being taught in medical school, it's the same as what naturopaths believe about fevers. Whether that is trickling down so much into like the people who are actually in the emergency rooms and the people in general practice, that's sort of to be determined, but the actual knowledge is definitely there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So fever phobia, I love this term because it's a term that was coined way back in 1980 by a doctor to describe parents' unrealistic concerns about childhood fever. So again, this was a regular doctor realizing that parents were overly worried about fevers. And I got so passionate about fevers, weird thing to get so passionate about, but I got so passionate because I'm in a lot of Facebook groups and often the advice in those Facebook groups drive me absolutely bananas. But when it comes to fevers, that's when it really drives me nuts because people are hysterical when it comes to fevers when you read it in Facebook groups. So in this podcast, we're going to be talking about the actual facts about fevers. We're going to be discussing red flags. We're going to be talking about what actually is a fever, because even that is a source of great confusion. We're going to talk about medication overuse and febrile seizures. So what we really have to keep at the front of our mind is that fever is actually a good thing. So fever in itself is not an illness. Fever is actually your body's way of fighting infection. So if you're giving Panadol or Nurofen to try and keep that temperature down below 37.5 when your child's sick, you're actually prolonging your child's illness and you're actually encouraging them to get sick again, if you know what I mean. So what a fever does, it will slow the growth and the reproduction of bacteria and viruses. It helps you make more neutrophils. It helps you make more T lymphocytes. And it just helps your body in that acute state of being unwell. Anything over 38 on a thermometer is considered a temperature, but your child would also be unwell, be irritable, more sleepy, vomiting, shivering, in pain. Like the temperature itself is not the problem. It's all those other issues that are the problem. Now, I'm just going to lay it out here now because I'm sure some people are already up in arms a few minutes into this podcast, but some children with a fever will be sick. Some children with a fever will be really, really sick, and those children need medical treatment. So I am absolutely not saying that you never need to worry about a fever. I'm just trying to educate you about fever. And I guess the actually concerning thing is that if your child has a fever and they are actually really, really sick, and you're just giving them Panadol and Nurofen, you're alternating every 2 hours, then you're actually missing the fact that they're actually really, really sick. So if in doubt, talk to a doctor. So I'll just want to run through some of the facts about fever. So first of all, the degree of the fever, so how high the temperature is, does not always correlate with the severity of the illness. Most fevers don't last very long. They're not a bad thing and they actually protect the host. As I mentioned, the fever will actually help your immune system and it will help you recover more quickly from the viral infections. So those are all the facts. That's what's in the medical literature. There's no evidence that children with a fever are at increased risk of outcomes such as brain damage. And a fever will rarely exceed 41 degrees Celsius, no matter what. You can have hyperthermia from something different. So you're too hot for some reason, and you can get higher than 41, and that can cause brain damage, but not a fever. But of course, a fever might make your child very uncomfortable. And that's kind of one reason to use antipyretic medication. So antipyretic medication is things like Panadol and Nurofen. So if your child's absolutely miserable, use Panadol or Nurofen. But don't use Panadol or Nurofen just to reduce the fever. Some of the red flags where I would say you definitely do need to consult your doctor is if your baby's less than 3 months and has a temperature over 38, straight to your doctor. If your child has a weak immune system because they're having treatment or they've got a medical condition, such as they're having chemotherapy, straight to the doctor. If they have a temperature over 38 plus, they've got things like a stiff neck, problems being exposed to the light, very sleepy, problems with breathing, all of those things, off to the doctor. And once your child has a febrile convulsion, then I would also go to the doctor, even though, again, the febrile convulsion is not necessarily problematic, which we will talk about later on. So one of the points of confusion is about what actually is a fever. So people often say to me, "Oh, my daughter had a really, really high fever. It was terrible." And I say, "What was it?" "Oh, it was 37.5." It's like, dude, that's a low grade fever. So low grade is 37 to 38. Moderate is 38.1 to 39. High is 39.1 to 41. So, if your child's hovering around 38, it's not necessarily a problem. And when it comes to measuring your child's temperature, where you measure it will actually affect what the cutoff is. So there's different measurements for if it's in your bum, if it's in your temperature's measured in your mouth, under your armpit, in your ear, they're all slightly different. And so if you are a visual person and you're liking all of this information, but it's just really going over your head because you can't see it written down, if you look on YouTube at this podcast, you'll see the video and you'll actually see slides that I'm working through so you can kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about as well. So I also see people come to tell me that, their child has had terrible time with these fevers, and so they've been doing Panadol and Nurofen alternating for days on end. And there's a lot of issues with that. And the first one, which you might have seen like mentioned quite frequently in the news, is that it's really hard to dose those medications in a syringe. As in, it's hard to know where the line is. Do you draw it up to the, like, whereabouts in the syringe to draw to? It's quite confusing, especially in the middle of the night, especially if your child's been screaming at you for 1 hour. Very hard. So I would say just make sure if you are going to use medication, make sure you fully understand how that syringe works and look at it in the daytime when you're not under stress. If you're giving your child paracetamol as a straight like Panadol, but also in some other cold and flu remedies, you could be giving them too much paracetamol. And also, middle of the night, your child's sick, you might just grab an adult medication and get the dose completely wrong again. And so there's interesting studies, and it is in animal models, but actually showing that paracetamol will increase the death rate from flu. So if your child has the flu, then just think carefully about using paracetamol and what you're using it for. And, back in the day, people did not use paracetamol or any other medication to manage their child's fever. So using antipyretics, so Panadol and Nurofen, to manage a fever in children increased dramatically from 1980 to 2002. And half of the parents who had been surveyed knew that they'd actually given the wrong dose because it is so hard. When kids are sick, when they've got viruses, when they've got dehydration, their liver enzymes might go a bit funky, and then taking paracetamol can actually make that a bit worse. Kids who haven't eaten for a few days, or kids who haven't eaten protein for a few days because they're just subsisting on toast because they're not well, can actually make the toxic effects of paracetamol worse. And children who are on other drugs, such as phenobarbital, and other drugs, are also at higher risk of paracetamol toxicity. So if your child's on other drugs, don't just take it for granted that paracetamol is okay. You definitely need to check. And there's also, some concerns about paracetamol use in infants and being linked to neurodevelopment. So the advice that is often given by doctors is to alternate Nurofen and Panadol every 2 hours. Is this evidence-based? No, it is not. And the American Academy of Pediatrics, who is very mainstream, very much conventional, actually say that there's no scientific evidence that combining Nurofen and paracetamol is either safe or that it gets the temperature down than use of either one alone. So just don't do it. It's the advice that's given, but it might not be safe and it probably doesn't work. And again, if you're watching the video, you'll see me sharing papers where I'm getting all this information wrong, but essentially paracetamol is just way overused in childhood fever, and that's the opinion of the medical fraternity and the pharmaceutical fraternity. If you do have to use paracetamol, and you might feel uncomfortable about this, but if you do have to use paracetamol, use a rectal suppository. Australians are very funny about this, but in other countries, such as France, using suppositories is completely the norm. And it works a bit better and it works quickly. And yeah, so you can give that a go. But again, you treat the child, not the temperature on the thermometer. So febrile convulsions. So a febrile convulsion or febrile seizure is a seizure that's occurring in a child between 6 months of age and 5 years of age that is accompanied by a fever of 38 degrees or higher without their central nervous system being involved. They're very common, and children with simple febrile seizures, so ones that are less than 15 minutes, do not have a higher risk of serious issues because of that. And using paracetamol and Nurofen to lower a child's temperature will not necessarily stop a febrile convulsion. So it's not good logic to use Nurofen and Panadol alternating to avoid a febrile seizure because it just doesn't work like that. And again, if the seizure goes on for more than 5 minutes, go to the doctor. But actually, most children with febrile seizures have a temperature less than 39 degrees. So there is, which isn't very high, as we've discussed. So there is a thought, or there is a school of thought that actually the trigger for the seizure isn't even the temperature. It's actually the underlying infection, which explains why the antipyretics won't work. If your child's had a febrile convulsion before, or other kids have had febrile convulsion before, or this is just something that you're really, really concerned about and it's kind of clouding your judgment on using antipyretics, there are things that you can do to help protect your child. So making sure that they've got adequate zinc, making sure they've got adequate iron, using a fish oil supplementation, breastfeeding, making sure they've got enough calcium and magnesium in their diet, and making sure they're getting vitamin D from the sun. So if you're reading this and going, yeah, I don't have a clue, I'm not doing a blood test, Very easy. Get in touch with us at the Pediatric Naturopath, have an appointment, and we can organize a hair tissue mineral analysis. So that is where we take a sample of your hair, or you cut off a sample of your hair, and we ship it off to the lab, and they can check it for zinc, for iron, for calcium, magnesium, not for vitamin D, and not for like essential fatty acids, but a lot of the other ones. So if we can make sure your child is nutritionally replete, they're going to have less chance of having a febrile seizure. So there's lots of studies in the scientific literature about low calcium and low magnesium being associated, and also low zinc. I know that so many children are low in iron, and doctors know that too, and doctors will test for iron. But what is generally, well, what is never happening basically is testing zinc. And zinc and iron are in the same foods, animal containing animal foods. So if your child's low in iron, guess what? They're probably low in zinc too. And that's a whole other podcast, because zinc is so important for fussy eating, for sensory issues, for emotional regulation, for sleep, for eczema, for, pretty much every childhood condition that there is, zinc is important. So if you're concerned enough to do a blood test and your doctor's going to check iron, just ask them to check zinc too. So breastfeeding, what isn't it good for? But exclusive breastfeeding will decrease the risk of having febrile seizures. Once your child has had a febrile seizure, what you can do is just give them extra vitamin C, because that will reduce the impact of that oxidative stress on your child's brain. And some kids are going to be more at risk for febrile seizures. So for the kids who are more at risk, you definitely want to do the safeguarding of checking their zinc, their iron, their calcium, magnesium. So those kids who are more at risk are the ones, unfortunately, whose parents whose mums smoked when they were pregnant, babies who have been in NICU for more than 28 days, babies who have a developmental delay, or young children, I should say, with a developmental delay. Having first or a second degree relative who's had febrile seizures, kids who go to daycare, kids under 18 months, and funnily enough, kids who've had a fever for less than 1 hour. So it's really that early stages of a fever, which, is another reason why it's possibly the infection, not the actual temperature. Those are the kids at risk. So if I want you to take away anything from what I've said so far, is that you do not need to treat a fever. You need to treat your child in front of you, but not the temperature on the thermometer. If you do decide that you want to treat your child's fever, there are some things that you can do that are safer than antipyretic medication. And the three things that we're going to talk about is herbs, homeopathy, and flower remedies. So there's heaps of herbs with a good traditional use when it comes to fever reduction. And probably the most well known is the combination in Yep tea, so yarrow, elderflower, and peppermint. So that's a tea that you can drink to help bring down the temperature. But other things are good too, like licorice, coriander. You can use chamomile or peppermint topically as well. You can do a foot bath with willow bark, or you can even do a suppository. But obviously, you would want to speak to a herbalist before you do that. And there's an oil called Viola odorata oil, and that has great results when it comes to fever. So the kids who use this essential oil topically had a greater fever reduction. And then homeopathy. So I'm not a homeopath, but there are some, pretty safe bets when it comes to homeopathy. And homeopathy for fevers is kind of one of those safe bets. So things like belladonna, ferrum phosphoricum, chamomile, aconitum are all potential things to use. So if you have a homeopathic first aid kit, you probably are well versed on this, and you're probably already doing these things. And, again, Australia is very conservative when it comes to homeopathy, whereas places like Germany, it's really quite normal to use homeopathy. The royal family in the UK have always had homeopaths on their team. So just because it's not well accepted in Australia. That doesn't mean that it's not well accepted in other, I guess, slightly more progressive countries. But they've done research about using homeopathic remedies for viral infections. And again, there's lots of homeopathic remedies that are well studied for this. I love my flower remedies. And there's one bush flower remedy called tall mulla mulla, which is also really good for fevers. There's, I think it's the Australian bush flower range has one called Solaris, which is specifically for heat stroke and fevers and things like that. Another kind of area of confusion is about what to actually dress your child in if they've got a fever. So, as the fever is rising, keep the child warm or actively warm them to decrease the energy needed to develop the fever. So, basically, to help them on their way, you keep them warm. Once your child is warm all the way to their feet and they've started to sweat, start to remove the clothing. Again, this is from PubMed. I'm not just making this stuff up on the spot. So that is my information on fever. I hope you found this really, really useful because it is an area of great fear and great confusion for a lot of parents. And everything I've said is evidence-based. If you want me to send you the list of references for this, please just go ahead and email me, admin@thepediatricnaturopath.com.au. We do a lot of acute consults. So next time your child has a viral infection, what you could do is actually make an acute appointment with one of the naturopaths on our team and get some herbal remedies, some nutrients to actually help your child so you don't have to resort to the antipyretics. So if you found this helpful, please share it with a friend. Please follow my podcast. Please follow me on Instagram at the Pediatric Naturopath. Thanks for tuning in to Holistic Health for Happy Kids. I hope you found today's episode helpful and inspiring on your journey to raise thriving, healthy little ones. Remember, small, consistent changes can lead to big transformations. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at the Pediatric Naturopath for more tips, tools, and inspiration. If you've got a question or a topic you'd love to hear about, please send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and keep supporting your kids in the most natural, nurturing ways possible.